Hi, my name is Vontarius, and today we're going to go over the paradox of Web3 mass adoption, written by, of course, myself, Vontarius Falls. How ironic. Now, the contents of this will go over the Web3 mass adoption paradox in itself, what fuels this paradox, some examples and supporting evidence, how can we overcome this paradox, and then we'll end it out with closing statements. Now, what is the Web3 mass adoption paradox? Well, mass adoption of Web3 will occur only when the push for mass adoption of Web3 ceases. Interestingly enough, this is actually the root and the entirety of the paradox. That the more we push for Web3 adoption, less likely it is to happen because we all push for it from very niche perspectives, not necessarily appealing to what the masses may need, but what we think the masses may want. In the Web3 space, there's this overwhelming urgency to bring Web3 and blockchain technology to the masses. All these mainstream marketing ploys that are involving celebrity gimmicks, giveaways, and other methods of awareness generating tactics. Now, I've seen celebrities acquiring NFTs through major projects, gifting them to them in hopes that it'll bring a lot of attention to their projects, and which it did. But when they weren't able to actually cater to what a community needed, the project failed. More so, the people who were looking for what the project was selling as a dream failed. And it caused a lot of people to steer away and create a narrative behind the entirety of Web3 because of a few niche spaces that were not appealing to what the people actually had in mind would be in Web3. Now, these are good for catching low-hanging fruits, but what's needed is seed planting rather than fruit catching. We need people who are planting trees that are going to grow later on in the space, produce fruits of success, of infrastructure, of systems that people can actually leverage for today, for tomorrow. Projects that were here 3 years ago most likely aren't here now. Projects that are going to be here in the next 5 years are projects that are setting up systems that more companies, that more people can leverage in unique ways that are actually applicable to what people are not just wanting, but what they're needing. I like to say there's a 3 month rule. It's kind of the same in dating, where after 3 months, 90 days, you generally get a better idea of what's working, what's not working, and if you want to move forward. We see that a lot with projects in Web3 actually that are creating products that they feel like people are going to have a need for, or they're going to desire. But after 3 months or so, the project dies because there was never a need for it. And marketing, there's a term, it's French, I believe, goes creches la cono. That means fill the gap or fill the hole being the need. And people are creating a perceived need inside of the space where they want people to feel like they need this project and adore this project and use this project every day, but it's not something that the masses are actually going to want because it's not relevant to them in the moment or going to be something that's relevant to them majorly in the future. And if it is possibly relevant to them in the future, they don't see the need for it at the moment because it's not paramount that they do. Now, what fuels this paradox? Well, mass human populations adopt ways of thinking and living out of necessity rather than desire. Desire will always be secondary. The want for something will never outweigh the need for something. Necessity generally creates action much quicker than want will. If there's no need for the adoption of technology, then the associated allure will not be enough. This means that no matter how much appeal there is to revamping any type of legacy system with Web3 technology, until it becomes apparent there's a need for it, it will fail to become a major factor. This is further fueled by the many pieces that make up human reasoning and decision making. We can see it here in the diffusion of innovation theory by Herbert Rogers. And it's going to delve into the societal nuances involved, highlighting the differences, psychological aptitude of those in different adoption cycles, where we can see in the beginning, the very forefront, we have the 2.5 percenters, the innovators, who are readily interested in adopting technology or systems or ways of thinking much quicker than those who are at the end, that 15th percentile, which are the laggards, people who are picking up on technology, systems, or ways of thinking because it's became no choice for them. They see that everyone else has done it. You can think of these people like your grandmother. No offense to grandmothers, grandmothers are great, but they generally have lived their lives. They've adopted ways of thinking that have suited them up until that point. They're not really interested in taking on too much new stuff. The brain can't handle it. You can think of this as your neighbor who wears his tinfoil hat, who's really considering standing away from the entirety of society because they feel like 5G and everything else has gotten to people's brains, and they're going to be one of the few who doesn't get taken over by aliens. Think of these as those people who kind of stay away from technology. That's a much higher percentile than the people who are the innovators and the early adopters. And you can see they don't come till way later on in the stage. The early majority and the late majority are there because they've seen that big companies and others have made it apparently obvious that there is some type of need. They created the allure of a need. And now people feel like they have to have this because the big players are saying it's necessary that they do. Now, this only comes when those people have created these deep infrastructures, these deep sets of roots that are embedded among society, and people cannot help but see that this is the way, that this is something you must take on in order to not get left behind. Now, some examples and supporting evidence. Well, we take a notice of occurrences where the United States further sought the development of a CBDC pilot, but more so after it became clear that China was well ahead in developing theirs. Now, they need to remain a global technology leader and rival its competitor. That helped push the adoption of CBDCs in the US. Competition is really huge. We've seen it with titans of industry, where the Fords, where the DuPonts, where the Chryslers, where these major competitors, they were in the car industry pushing on the cutting edge in order to further embed themselves within society and build these large industries. But competition fueled the innovation that they were pushing for. We'll see that inside of Web3 heavily. I got to see it in the Solana space, where a lot of projects in the early stages before Solana hit its 240 peak, they were looking to innovate as quickly as possible and fill a need because there weren't projects doing what people wanted. They saw what Ethereum had going on, and they wanted to replicate that success on a platform, on a blockchain that was likely to take out Ethereum as they expected, or where there was a much lower barrier to entry. And this is when Ethereum had gas prices that were touting of $500 or more on transactions. Your gas transaction would cost more than what your actual transaction was. So the fees on Solana being so low created a low barrier of entry system, and the ability for people to get in, innovate, and create projects similar to Ethereum and or better in some ways, in some instances, because they were low barrier to entry ways that they could get in and create these things. So it didn't bar the innovation. We had a ton of people there creating a ton of things, a ton of scams arising, a ton of people losing money. And there was no need for people to seek security because they were making more money than they were losing. There were a lot of losers in the space, but there was more winners, in my opinion, more big winners, in my opinion. And they were at the forefront. People saw more of the wins than the losses, and that idea, that allure, created a need for more money, more projects to pop up that could generate money. And so we didn't see a lot of regulation there. Well, this segues right into what happened next. Because of this, it further tickled the SEC's toes only after the dominoes effect of failed companies and US investor losses occurred. While there was more money to be made and freedom from no regulation, the need for this escape in the currently regulated system heavily outweighed sentiment from those who found comfort in regulations. Now, once that period of heavy losses outweighed gains because of the systematic failures that are spurred by human design, people naturally saw the need for more regulation to protect themselves. When there was more money to be made, no one cared about regulation. But once they started taking major losses, and it affected more people, they were like, yeah, we need some protection because things are rogue here. It's the Wild West, and we want no parts in it. We can see that with FTX. Everyone went feral after FTX had its bankruptcy, after investors were hit heavy. We saw this with Three Arrows Capital facing insolvency, with Terra USD losing its peg and sliding below $1. People went rampant wanting SEC to step in, wanting all types of security measures to happen. when originally this was not the case because the allure of making more money, the need to make more money to support themselves, the need to want to become like the millionaires that they saw popping up overnight from all types of crypto scams was way more appealing than the need for some security at that time. That changed drastically. Now, how can we overcome this paradox? Well, by focusing more on the product rather than the adoption of it, by increasing the speed in which we iterate and fail within various facets of Web3, the product becomes more suitable for the consumer rather than the consumer becoming more suitable for the product. By focusing on what can appeal to the masses in this moment, creates an allure that lasts just for a moment. When you're focusing on how to better structure Web3 as the building blocks and the foundation for the future, eventually the masses will look down and they will realize what they're standing on. The need to understand it will arise because it's necessary, not just because they want to. That's when mass adoption occurs. When people look down and they realize that they're standing on top of Web3 infrastructure, and it's necessary that they learn it in order to continue on with their ways in society, in order to make sure they're not getting left behind, in order to make sure that they're capable of building for the future and helping generations that they look to upbring be ready for the future. They adopt because they have to, rather than just wanting to. When you leave choice, there's ambiguity. Now, closing statements. Those who understand the need for advancement and exist as its advocate are less inclined to reside in the realm of perceived status quo. People are naturally motivated to follow their beliefs and oppose most of what contradicts it. Some being able of accepting anything outside of that belief as long as there's some sort of compromise involved. They'll keep an open mind, but they want to make sure it fits within their realm of understanding in that moment. Anything outside of it is potentially a deterrent to how they want to live their lives. They'll try to keep themselves as far away from it as possible. But there are those few people, like the 2.5% or the 13.5%ers, that are the innovators and the early adopters who are more open to this because they understand that advancement is necessary for humans to continue to grow. Now, as with new ways of living or perceived upgrades, it has to resonate with an individual's needs, beliefs, and be filtered through their human thought pattern before it can be considered in the slightest, because it always varies en masse until an occurrence occurs that takes the common denominator and it generates a trigger among similar perspectives. There typically isn't a standard way of mass adoption until something major happens where people all see eye to eye on something, or where something major happens where it creates people who see up here and people who see down here, and then there's people in the middle. It's hard to get people to generally become mass aware of something, who want to adopt something in mass and much quicker because there's a perceived need to, because it has to. A way of thinking that occurs much quicker is generally because something major has happened and there's no choice but for people to all of a sudden put all of their attention, effort, and energy into it. Now, familiarity is parallel to safety, and because of the uncertainty generated by tending to adopt something outside of your current realm of understanding, most people avoid it. They want safety. What they're familiar with is what they're safe with, what they're comfortable with. Not everyone needs to see the bigger picture, though, to be in it. You just make sure the picture is timeless, and the people who need it see it, and they want to be in it will. They'll describe it to those who don't have the capacity to see it. Make the picture big enough, make the canvas big enough, draw as much as you need to draw. And the people who want to draw themselves in will come along, pick up a brush, and draw themselves in. Now, that is the mass adoption paradox of Web3, written by Vontarius Falls. Thank you for having me.